when the Baptist anointed me, there was no holy oil, no ceremony. It was like this. Open your eyes to the light. It has begun. Don't stop it now. Don't let them stop it.
I'll be with you. I won't leave.
You are my witness.
From the movie Mary Magdalene, during the scene when Mary, Isis, anoints Jesus, Osiris, for his sacrament of earthly destruction. Played by the chick from The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and the dude from The Joker, respectively. As the worldly manifestation of Sophia, of course Mary can stop, quote, them. The apostles, the Jewish priesthood, the Romans, all themselves the worldly manifestations of the archons. But she won't. Why? Because the Logos needs to experience the totality of the human tragedy as well as the victory of divine remembrance. Just like you must, for the archetypal drama of wisdom and the Logos is ever present in your souls. It's bittersweet, painful, insane at times, but completely transformative when we allow Mary and Jesus to unite in our hearts under the charged plasmate of Gnosis. It's a saga that happens in all stories and all histories. It is your cosmic adventure if you fully awaken like Jesus and allow Mary to assist and witness your meat sack crucifixion before the rulers of this age.
What do we say to the god of death?
Not today.
The Valentinians contended that every woman Jesus met in the Gospels were manifestations of Sophia. Fadi Riyad pointed out in our interview that Jesus starts early in his ministry being flippant and even contentious towards the female gender. As with the Syro-Phoenician women or his own mother at the wedding at Cana.
Go ahead, be crucified, see if I can.
As the Gospels progress, Jesus becomes nicer and embracing of women, climaxing with that sensual encounter in the Gospel of John after the resurrection, where he and Mary completely know each other. That is their story. That is our story, for we are under the charged plasmate of Gnosis.
What we do in life echoes in eternity.
We'll be delving into an encompassing show on Mary Magdalene and how her teachings can allow you to fully wake up like Jesus or accompany a lost soul you love like Mary.
I see it all now so clearly. The past, the present, the future. I know how the story ends. With us, Daddy. It ends with you and me.
Happy happy heresies, and welcome to the desert of the real. Welcome to Aeon by Gnostic Radio. We don't take prisoners but liberate them. We are not the final authority on anything, but hope to be an endless possibility for everything. Always running with those searching for the truth and avoiding those who have found it. I, your host, Miguel Connor, is so eternally glad you are here with me to find that story of Mary and Jesus, Sophia and the Logos, in your hearts and your life.
I was not born to live a man's life, but to be the stuff of future memory. Now once more I must ride with my knights to defend what was and the dream of what could be. I've often thought that in the hereafter of our lives, when I owe no more to the future, can be just a man, that we may meet, and you'll come to me and claim me yours. Know that I am your husband.
In this eternal now, we have the pleromic pleasure of being joined by Meggan Watterson, who will be discussing her new book, Mary Magdalene Revealed, the First Apostle, her feminist gospel, and the Christianity we haven't tried yet. Love this work for various reasons, but one of them is that Meggan provides a clear path to leveraging the rituals and disciplines of the ancient Gnosticoi. Not only with keen insights, but with sound scholarship, just as academics like April DeConnick and David Brackey and others have. We can reconstruct those forbidden rituals. In the end, the Gnostics were just part of that mystery school vibe, sending their souls to hell for purgatorial cleansing and then up and beyond star portals to be consecrated. A process of letting go of all the material cancers, anamnesis or loss of forgetfulness, and then an ecstasy of experiencing the alien God. Yes, just like Jesus had to go through in the Gospels.
If the sky were to suddenly open, there would be no law, there would be no rule, there would only be you and your memories, the choices you've made, and the people you've touched. If this world were to end, there would only be you and him and no one else.
Nipples for men and birdie num-num, 'cause we have the teachings of Mary Magdalene, and we have the perceptic research and revelations of Meggan, and we have the companionship of Sophia, even as she allows the powers and principalities to take us down. But hey, Sophia is the primordial passion narrative in creation, the first developed Lucifer archetype, an ultimate trickster deity, an anti-hero savior. Sophia got cancel cultured from the Pleroma because of a rebellion against the treasury of light.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here.
Downloaded into chaos, created matter with her suffering, and gave birth to the supreme being of this dimension, Yaldibaldi.
I am the architect. I created the matrix.
As the Valentinians wrote on Sophia, indeed, from her tears was born all wet substance, from her laughter all luminous, from her pain and consternation all the corporal elements of the world. Indeed, at times she wept and was in pain, as they say, because she had been abandoned alone in the darkness and void. At times, however, She thought of the light which had abandoned her, took comfort and laughed. Then she felt pain, and at other times she was seized by uneasiness and astonishment.
She tore a hole in our universe, gateway to another dimension.
That must have been a long 17 billion years, I say, Sophia. Culminating with her tragic bastard son, robbing her essence from her purse and hiding it in matter. Until it became us. Stephen Davis summarizes our entire saga in his book on the secret book of Juan. The mistake of Sophia will be resolved, and wisdom will be fully restored to God. The mind of God will be fully sane and healed. The Gnostic myth is a tale of the growth of God's mental disintegration. The myth reaches its most unhappy form when the Godhead has not only forgotten who God is, but does not even know that God truly exists and begins to worship the artificial deity Yaldabaoth as creator of an external world. In the depths of God's fall, the Godhead believes itself to be human and worships Yaldabaoth as the God of the Hebrew Bible. When the Godhead ceases to know itself, God seems to be human and falls into the multiple personalities we know as human beings. Humankind is fallen God. The goal of Gnostic salvation, then, is to bring self-awareness back to God, which means that divine self-knowledge is the religious goal of human life.
Since the universe is actually composed of information, then it can be said that information will save us. This is the saving Gnosis which the Gnostics sought. There is no other road to salvation.
Meggan and I could only do about an hour. She was in transit late in the summer, and on that day I was sandwiched between one of my rescue dogs recuperating from serious surgery and my beautiful little Ellie having to go get some surgery, and about 20 other issues. Still a complete, mind-blowing interview, as you will see. But for Prime members and patrons at Patreon, I will provide a package of Mary Magdalene insights. Many listeners have asked me that I bundle up past interviews and themes. So this is a pilot program of sorts, and let me know what you think. After Meggan, I'll provide a section where Karen King summarizes the Gospel of Mary. Then one section with Jane Schauberg on Mary Magdalene's total role in Gnostic and Orthodox history, including what makes her singular and remarkable. We'll move to Michael Hearns, who will explain that Mary Magdalene is the first pope and the true high priestess of the ancient mysteries. We'll end with Dr. James Gardner on Mary's role in the Gospels, including a surprisingly good argument that Mary and Jesus were married. More than 2 hours of bonus. By the end, you'll be an expert on Mary Magdalene and the gnosis she provides for your transformation. Let us do the interview with Meggan Watterson on Mary Magdalene Revealed and find a Christianity few have tried. Write your own gospel, live your own myth.
What was so threatening about this gospel?
Look around you, Father. What do you see?
I see a church.
It's a building. The true church of Jesus Christ is so much more. Not in buildings made of wood and stone. I love Jesus. I don't need an institution between him and me. You see, just God and man. No priests, no churches. The first words in Jesus' gospel are, the kingdom of God is inside you. and all around you, not in the buildings of wood and stone. Spread a piece of wood, and I'm there. Leave the stone, and you will find me. Yes, brother.
This is the AM Bite interview, and with us, we definitely have the pleasure and the honor of being joined by Meggan Watterson to discuss her book, Mary Magdalene Revealed, the First Apostle, Her Feminine Gospel, and the Christianity We Haven't Tried Yet. Thank you very much for coming on, Meggan. How are you?
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, the pleasure is all ours. So I wanted to share that I really enjoyed your book. In fact, I was reading it. I started reading it. I was waiting for a plane to going to Toronto last week from Chicago. And I started getting very emotional in some parts because it really struck me. Mm-hmm. And I thought for a while, I thought people would walk by and say, somebody call the TSA. This middle-aged guy has tears in his eyes in the middle of the, while waiting for his plane. But it really hit home. And I think part of it is that I could relate. Like you, I feel, that you were born with a curious soul. You're a searcher. And like me, you grew up in the Christian dispensation. It was around you. And you sought answers there and saw beautiful things there. But at the same time, you also ran into some blocks, some frying pans on the way that were also teaching you that there is a hidden Christianity. Is that basically, am I close there, Meggan?
Yeah. Yes. I felt that there was this, maybe I could describe it as a great big unsayable love inside of me. And I didn't meet with it very often externally in the Christianity that I was finding around me. And yet I felt because of this sense of this great big unsayable love that it existed, just because I couldn't see it. I still had this faith or this deep knowing, the Greek word for it is gnosis, this experience. The difference between gnosis and intellectual knowledge is experiential. And for me, there was this experience of love that I felt must be at the heart of Christianity, if Christianity is what my heart is telling it is. So I went searching for that and dedicated years of scholarship trying to find the Christianity we haven't tried yet.
Well said. And yes, I think in one part of your book, you talk about as a child going to church. And you say that you broke out in hives, and as you write, the body never lies. So basically, what was happening? You realized this can't be it while you were in church.
Yes. It was a profound and visceral moment. And of course, as a little girl, I didn't know how to articulate or fully understand what was happening. But there was anger and there was fear, which was expressing itself very articulately in my skin, with my body reacting in that way to encountering the New Testament. And it took me years and years and years to be able to go back to the Bible because of that encounter. But when I did, I was approaching it knowing then, as an adult, that I had sensed something real, that something really was missing. And so when I went back to seminary and finally felt ready to face, whatever anger and fear arose within me as a little girl, I knew that I was looking for what was missing. I knew that there was something real that my body was communicating, and that it expresses it to me with that phrase, "The body never lies." I really, that's the truth of my experience. It just never does.
Yes, there's a lot of insights in your journey. And as you grew up, what was your evolution with Mary Magdalene as a figure? Because let's face it, the church, it's kind of like she's hidden in plain sight. She's there in the Catholic Church, but she really isn't. How was your evolution with this great figure?
Well, I think the closer I got to understanding my own heart and listening to my own voice, and what I mean by that is just that intuition, that inner sense of self. The closer I got to really believing in myself and trusting my own voice, the closer I got to hearing the truth of her story versus what was presented to me, which of course has always been for thousands of years that she was the penitent prostitute. But as again, when I entered my seminary and into the scholarship of researching her gospel, I approached it with this knowing, this gnosis, this experience that there was more to the story than what we have heard before. There's more, if we have the heart large enough to hear it, there's so many expressions both in the New Testament and in many of these gospels that weren't included in the Bible, in the codification of the Bible in the 4th century. There's so many expressions where Christ says, may those who have the ears to hear it. There's this comment again and again about having the ears to hear it. And what I think that is about is expanding our awareness, expanding our capacity to love, or expanding where love has reached before, and expanding our notions of God or the divine, expanding, allowing the story to move forward, and expanding what we've ever thought we've known about Christ, which we're only going to have the ears to hear what her scripture is telling us if we, within ourselves, have really broken down these barriers about what it means to be human, about what it means to be a man and to be a woman, about what it means to be human versus a god, or, unless we are ready to really expand our idea of what's possible, we can't really accept and see or hear who it was that she really was. And so that's how we were able to have her right here in hidden in plain daylight, as you say, because there's this fixed idea of who a woman would be in relation to a man who was a god. There's this very fixed, entrenched idea of who she would be. And to think that she might be a partner, a companion, an equal, or someone who was meant to receive his transmission, his succession, that was beyond our capacity to hear or see at that point.
Well said. I mean, even the Nag Hammadi Library's Dialogue of the Savior says it right there. She is the woman who understood the all. She's the one in this world who gets it. And as others have said, she is the manifestation of Sophia in this world, just like Jesus is the manifestation of reason. So they're in balance. Right.
They're in, you really, to understand one, you have to understand the other as well. That the completeness or the fullness of Christ is really not perceived without her. That's what her gospel, or that's what integrating who she was or who she is and who she's meant to be, that's really what the Christianity we haven't tried yet. This is what it's pointing to, is this idea of allowing love to reach where it has never been before within our own consciousness and perception.
Yes, indeed. And the Christianity we haven't tried was tried many centuries ago, but it got squashed. And I mean, we can talk about all the research, but what I like about your book is not only do you have a lot of insights on Mary Magdalene, the Gnostics, but you also provide this experiential Mary Magdalene in your life and how others can experience it. As you write, finding Mary M's voice was finding your own voice. And there is one scene which was very touching. It's that scene where you read, you were reading online about the seed bank and you're having sort of an existential crisis. And you use the first lines from the Gospel of Mary as a prayer, which is every nature, every model form, every creature exists in and with each other. And that gave you a huge moment of gnosis, didn't it?
Yes, yes. I mean, to me, that is the ultimate description of love, that we are all, every creature, every modeled form, every nature, we exist in and with each other. That is a paradigm shift that, the great French mystic Teilhard de Chardin, he says, when we're able to harness the energy of love, we will have discovered fire for a second time. This is what I feel that gorgeous statement from Mary's Gospel is trying to relate, is that we have yet to reach a love that really understands that we are all interdependent on each other, and we all have worth, intrinsic worth in our being, from the dirt and the earth itself to what we would think of as an angel. Like, there is every creature, every nature, every modeled form, we exist in and with each other, which means there is no hierarchy. There is no, that's something that the ego creates. That isn't real. And that isn't how the spiritual world works. There is no hierarchy of existence where one being is ranked as more powerful or important as the other. This is a completely different perception of existence where we all have intrinsic worth. So rather than, a vertical line, this is on the horizontal. So this is an understanding of existence that we all need each other, and we all have, there's intrinsic worth, from a spider to myself. There's intrinsic worth and value.
Well said. And I also like in that chapter, a voice came to you and said, give me what you cannot carry. And you write how you had this, again, moment of gnosis, of satori, where you realize, well, I have to start over, but you also realize that starting over is just becoming aware of what you already knew, or you knew the whole time.
Right. Becoming more authentic. I think that's, for so many of us, the journey is dropping the various veils, going through the various stages of the ego and reaching a place of authenticity. And, for me, I was, and still am, but there was this fierce independence and this self-reliance that I was exhausting myself with, and really trying to control, protect myself, protect my son, make sure everything was going to be okay. And I was exhausting myself over it. And all along, I had always sensed and felt and knew that great, big, unsayable love inside of me. I knew it was more than me. I knew it was a part of me. I knew it was with me. I knew that it was this presence that had always been a witness and had always been there, as if reaching out a hand, offering me support, but always allowing me to remain in my fiercely independent, stubborn sense of self-reliance. But that evening, that sort of conversion part of my story was really an experience of surrendering, but not surrendering over to something that was outside of me, or above me. This was surrendering. It was more of a a waking up, an allowing of what's always been within me to rise up, and for me to meet it, and to really hear that voice was to surrender to that knowing that there is a love that has been carrying me and has been with me and guiding me, and I don't need to pretend as if it doesn't exist just because I didn't know yet how to reconcile the fact that that presence felt Christ-like to me. And yet, as a feminist and as, a modern woman, as an independent woman, I did not know how to reconcile that true spiritual experience with a sense of a Christianity I could authentically identify with outside of me. So I had been denying it and silencing it and ignoring it because I didn't know what the hell to do with it. I didn't know what to do with that truth. And that evening was my white flag, and knowing that whatever happened next, it needed to be with the truth of this love that has always been within me. I need to stop pretending like it's not right here within me, and I need to stop pretending like I can exist without it, or I know anything other than it. It is the foundation of who I am, and it's a truth that is more true to me than anything. And so from that moment forward, I needed to move in a way that love was going to move me. And that really sincerely changed everything.
That's really inspirational, and glad it happened. And you feel part of this is to, I guess, not share your truth with the world, but to share the story of Mary Magdalene, the truth about who she was and so forth?
Yes, because, for me, her gospel really provided a bridge between, the aversion, the anger, the fear, and the hives I experienced with the Bible that was presented to me versus, what I began to uncover when I read her gospel was a Christianity that more mirrored and externally validated this great big unsayable love inside of me. It was the missing aspect of Christianity I felt was silenced and submerged in the version that was originally presented to me. And so, for example, Professor Hal Talsic, who I studied with at Columbia when I was doing my Masters of Divinity, he created a New Testament, which is so phenomenal, and it includes all of the Gospels that were canonized in the 4th century, but then also all of those Gospels that were edited out, ones like the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, or the Acts of Paul and Thecla, or Thunder Perfect Mind. And these are all Gospels that validate that women have worth, women's voices matter because our experience in a female body matters. And as you were pointing out with the completion of if Christ may be the logos or the mind, then, Mary Magdalene is the embodiment of Sophia, the wisdom. And so there is worth and value and beauty and importance in having both, in having the authority of the divine and of spiritual authority embodied within the male and then also the female, that both are important and intrinsic to our understanding of what it means to be human.
Yeah, I would agree. It's all basically about being Plato's hermaphrodite, the Adam Kadmon, and so forth. And I think you write too in your book, it's the anthropos, right? The complete whole human being.
Exactly. Fully human, fully divine. And we can't know this. We can't ultimately know ourselves completely or fully unless we also hear from the divine feminine. We hear from the Sophia. We hear from the embodiment of how God speaks through a woman.
Yeah, you mentioned Hal Tosick, a wonderful man. I correspond with him once in a while. He's been on the show to discuss The Thunder Perfect Mind, his great translation. Celine Lilly's been on the show to discuss her work, like The Rape of Eve, which is an incredible book, powerful book.
Yeah.
So it's great that you and these scholars are doing all of this work. Although, obviously, now it's pretty obvious with the scholarship even before, Elaine Pagels, Jane Schauber, Karen King.
Yeah.
We have to admit that Mary Magdalene was a community leader. She was an important figure.
Yeah.
All these Gospels tell her she was one of the top disciples of Jesus or the Savior. We're not even getting all New Agey wishy-washy. This is sound scholarship right here.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's time that we acknowledge and verify the validity of that, of her spiritual authority. It's very important that she's recognized as you said, an apostle and a disciple and one of the leading figures in the early Christ movement.
And when you're studying, is it basically like this, Meggan, that basically, as with Paul, who was kind of, I guess Tertullian called him the apostle of the heretics and so forth, when you have a figure like Mary Magdalene who is that important, but her ideas are too Gnostic and too dangerous, basically you decide you're just going to incorporate her and just edit her the way you want it. That's what the church did.
Well, yes, as Dr. Karen King describes in her wonderful translation of Mary's Gospel, the church really solved two issues at once when they decided to edit out her Gospel from when they were formally canonizing the Bible in the 4th century. They solved the issue of the fact that she clearly had an extraordinary relationship with Christ. And she was a central figure in his life. So by denigrating her character and by editing out her gospel, they solved the issue of, who was she going to be? They didn't have to deal with her if she didn't have a gospel. And the second problem they solved was women's leadership. They were really struggling because the early Christ movement, that form of Christianity, before it became Constantine's, before it became integrated as the empire's religion, it was a radical form of love that was practiced in a way where women were considered equals, which, did not exist in the Roman Empire. Right. And stood that whole concept, as I was mentioning before, of the hierarchy of our existence, that depending on our race, our citizenship, whether we're male or female, whether we're slaves, that ranked us very concretely within the Roman Empire. And that form of Christianity was saying that women were as worthy as men to lead the church. And in the 4th century, when Christianity was becoming the empire's religion, they needed to solve that issue, that problem of women's authority within the church, because they wanted it to then be a solely male succession of apostolic authority from, men to men to men to men. And so by getting rid of her gospel and other gospels that clearly state, the union of the opposites, for example, like the Gospel of Philip and the Gospel of Thomas, that speak a lot about making the male into female and the female into male, really turning that whole idea, that concept, that egoic mind frame of what it means to be male and what it means to be female, turning that on its head and saying, ultimately what matters is the soul that abides within the body.
Moving on to Mary and her teachings herself, as you write in the Gospel of Mary, there are 7 powers. And of course, most people who are raised Christian know about Mary and the 7 demons that you find in the New Testament. But these are not something you want to take as spiritual powers, but what are they? This has to do with the ego, doesn't it?
Well, a scholar I adore, a scholar and priest, Cynthia Bourgeau, she refers to them as the egoic operating system. So these are 7, she refers to them as climates. These are 7 climates of the ego, and we all contain them equally. We may have different proclivities. You know, for example, some of us may hang out in the compulsion for rage, which is the 7th power. Some of us may hang out more there, whereas others of us may hang out in the craving for death, you know, which is later within Christianity, they become the 7 deadly sins. And as you said in Luke, they're described as the 7 demons. But in Mary's gospel, which predates any of those concepts, they're just powers. So for me, when I came across them, it was such a relief because it's just, okay, this is like reading the ingredients label of what it means to be human, right? Like there's no judgment, there's no right or wrong. It's that we all contain this. This is a part of the deal. When we become human, we're going to have these 7 powers, but the opportunity we have in being human is that we can awaken while within one of those forgetful states, because this is all that they're described as in Mary's gospel. We forget, and ignorance binds us, judgment binds us to one of these 7 powers, and then we act from that forgetful state. We act, for example, from the 7th power, the compulsion of rage, rather than first waking up within it and seeing, oh my God, I am so outraged. I am so angry, you know, and validating it, you know, not chastising or judging ourselves that we're angry. We are meant to be angry. We're human. This is a part of the deal. However, we do not. We have the choice. We have the will to not act from that forgetful place. And that's the practice. That's the self-emptying love. This is the ancient Christian way of wakening up, rising, you know, resurrecting within that moment and allowing the soul to become so present within us that we can see where it is that we actually are. The Aramaic word, which is the language that Christ spoke, the Aramaic word for death is simply existing elsewhere. So if we take that and we think about, you know, the way that these 7 powers can bind us in a state of forgetfulness, and then existing, you know, to die is to exist elsewhere. When we are stuck in one of these realms, one of these climates of the ego, we are not present. We are not present to what is actually happening before us. We are enraged at someone for something they did or something they haven't done, or, you know, we are depressed, you know, we're in a darkness, or we are in a state of ignorance, or we are in a state of craving for death, meaning like gluttony. So we're in a state of addiction. You know, any of these states of the ego, if we can only awaken within them, or how I like to phrase it is, it's an experience of letting love reach to where it has never been before, because that is the experience of it for me. It like requires this like, it's almost like love has to find a path that hasn't been forged before, but within us, inside of us, you know, and it has to find a way to reach this aspect of us that's been cut off entirely from love. And the experience of it when it finally reaches through to it is that you wake up and you you're finally present again inside this current moment. You're not existing elsewhere. You're not dead to the present moment. You're not obsessed with something that someone did or what someone hasn't done yet. And you can return, you can resurrect in this body, in this life, right now, and actually be present to it.
Well said. I mean, as you quote, the Gospel of Philip says resurrection doesn't happen in the next world. It has to happen in this life. And you describing those demons, I was like, God, she's describing my life. Addiction, anger. Oh, boy. I need to go to an AA meeting today, I just realized. But, but right now we're having a great conversation. And I think what's very important, too, as we adopt this spirituality in the Gospel of Mary, and this is key because it gets rid of so much guilt and projection, is and you repeat that many times in your book, Mary Magdalene revealed, and that's in the place where Jesus, well, I think he's only called a savior in this work, but he does say there is no such thing as sin, and I believe it's your mind that have created sin, right?
Right. It's simply when you are you are in one of those forgetful states and you are bound. Mary Magdalene's gospel, at the end of it, the culmination of it, she says she is finally unbound. And so when we are bound within one of those states of the seven powers of the ego, we are really blinded. We can't see that we are also a soul. So we're consumed by our rage, for example, and then we act on it. The sin is not original. Sin is not something we are destined to do, or we are not sinful beings. That this is what Mary's gospel is saying, that when we forget that we are also a soul and we act from that place of ego, this is how we create a sense of missing the mark. That word sin is so loaded in the English language, but if we keep it in the Greek, it simply means missing the mark. So we act rather from love, rather from the soul. We act from a place of the ego, the divided self. And, Christ says again and again in so many different ways, in so many of these texts that were silenced and buried, I am the one who comes from what is undivided. So he was able to wake up to this reality of the love that is present in him and is him ultimately, to the extent that none of these seven powers could have power over him.
And is this process, what you call in your book, kenosis, the Greek from emptying out all the negative things within your soul? Right.
So that would be a moment of, say for example, when Christ goes into the wilderness and the quote unquote Satan or the devil, tries to, and he's able to turn the other cheek, or he's able to not allow any of the kind of egoic hooks to persuade him. I feel that this is so present for all of us in our lives on a daily basis, whether it's a child who keeps triggering us, a family member, our spouse or our ex-spouse, there are so many ways we are triggered. And what it is, when we have the eyes to see it, when we're really in our soul, what we can see is it's ego speaking at us. It's ego coming at us. And what we don't want to do is then respond with the ego, because all that does then is perpetuate more of that untruth, right? It's not the ultimate truth when someone rages at us. That isn't really what, deeper down, there's a deep wound they're raging from, right? There's an idea that they lack love, or there's an idea that you somehow took love from them, which of course could never be true, because a great big unsayable love exists within them. They just don't have the eyes to see it.
Yes, and they're struggling with their own demons. And I guess this comes to exactly. Goes well with my next question, and that is something we need to tap into. Like you said, we don't have those eyes to see, but that's the concept of the Nous, and you call it the quote eye of the heart. But you also offer a wonderful definition by Thomas Merton, which is a pure diamond blazing the invisible light of heaven. Gorgeous.
Oh, I love Thomas Merton. It's his writing is so inspiring to me and so beautiful because I feel like he really reached that truth and he has, of course, the 7-story mountain. So 7 was emblazoned within his own consciousness as well. Yes, this is a reality that is spoken about in Mary's gospel, where she's asking Christ, when I see you in a vision, how is it that I see you? Is it with the soul or with the spirit? And Christ says it is neither with the soul nor the spirit, but the mind which exists between the two. But that word for mind in Greek is nous, N-O-U-S. And again, it's better to keep that word in Greek because the English translation of mind really loses its meaning. The Greek translation is best described as the spiritual eye of the heart. So it's a way of seeing with an aperture that exists within us. It's not our organ, it's not the physical orifice, the organ of the eye. It's an actual perception that we can begin to perceive what is really real. So, for example, when someone's coming at us with their ego, we can begin to see with the spiritual eye of the heart, and we can acknowledge and we can see in that moment the pain that this person is coming at us. So we don't have to we don't have to feel that our ego is being threatened or could ever be injured by whatever this person is saying or what they're trying to do. We can begin to see with this spiritual eye of the heart. And as you said, people fighting their own demons, this is it's so painful for me to watch people who get lost inside of themselves because they fall so deeply entrenched into one of these 7 powers of the ego, to the extent where love feels absolutely lost from them. They don't have an experience of love. And this is when, self-harm and addiction and, or harming others becomes the way for them to feel again. And so, fighting our demons is very real. It's very, and being able to, it's really like all the sci-fi movies, all of the books like Harry Potter that have become so loud and present and desired to be consumed in a mass way. I don't think that this is an accident. I think that this is because we crave that inner power, that inner ability to be able to see what's real, to be able to face the demons, whether they're within us or outside of us, and to be able to find our way back home, to find our way back to what's true. And, to that voice of Voldemort, to really be able to begin to recognize it within us so that we're no longer guided by it, but by a much deeper truth.
And with these concepts, and again, your concepts are exactly as scholars, most people would know that 1st and 2nd century Christians were using kenosis, nous. Obviously, Greek Orthodoxy still embraces the concept of the nous, gnosis, no such thing as sin. So this was in the air. So having said that, you have a chapter in your book, How to Meditate Like Mary Magdalene. So how do you, besides getting your book eventually, which I hope the audience does, how does one meditate like Mary Magdalene with all these concepts?
So I was able to study and begin to practice this ancient form of meditation that the Hesychists developed, and the Hesychists were, they date all the way back to the 6th century, but most likely this practice came before then. And evidence of their practice is in a very famous book that everyone could read called the Philokalia, and it's this sayings of the Desert Fathers, and essentially what they were attempting to do is to bring all their consciousness into their heart. And the answer to Mary's question within her gospel is unfortunately torn out, and we don't have the answer of what the Savior gave her within her gospel of when, you know, he says that it's the new that perceives this vision, and that is what ... and then it's removed. But at another point, he says that there where the new is, there is the treasure. So this is, and the Hesychists describe the heart as the treasure house. And so there was this practice of going inward to the heart and bringing all the consciousness into the heart. And this is where, as you mentioned, Merton described a blazing diamond. There was a light that the Hesychists began to describe, a light that isn't a light. It's not a light that you see with the eye. It's a light that is like an awareness, a warmth, a truth. It's this inner knowing that blazes and has the capacity to cut through what isn't true. And so I began to meditate like the Hesychists, to go inward and practice eventually what I refer to as the soul voice meditation, because what happened for me is that the more and more I went inward and met with that great big unsayable love inside of me, the more I was able to meet with and speak and move in the way that love would guide me to. And there's this sense of integrity, right? Making the inside like the outside, and this sense of wholeness that became possible, where there is no pretense, there are no veils. It's just what I hear inside of me is what I say, and what I know is true is how I act. And there's a great simplicity and a great relief in that, and a sense of being carried truly, because in my experience of going inward and meditating, as I imagine Mary Magdalene did, and Christ instructed her, and later Hesychists practice. I don't think it's an accident that the only copies of Mary's Gospel were found in Egypt, where these practices were taking place throughout the centuries. And I feel that effort of going inward into the heart is what can allow us to become whole and to integrate our sense of self and what we know to be true to such an extent that we make our life about that union. We make our life about expressing the simplicity of just who we are.
Well said. And you're talking about what is also known as the Jesus prayer, which I was taught by a Greek Orthodox friend, and he's told me how to do it, when to say it with the heart, and he told me this advice. He said, do not do it without a priest or a teacher. Right. So I went out and did it on my own, because I wasn't going to, and it messed me up, Meggan, because my ego just lashed out. I had horrible anxiety. I was like, I'm never doing this without a master.
Right, because when you go into the heart, and this is why Mary's Gospel is so profound and so metaphysical, and really like it's really like a roadmap, because when you go inward to the heart, that is when you have to face the 7 powers, and so that's what you were meeting with, and in its various forms and its various guises, you know. You go into the heart, you're not just going to meet with that great big unsayable love, you're going to meet with all the various aspects of the ego that See, the ego doesn't want to die. The ego is terrified of death, terrified. And so it wants to do everything, and it experiences the merging of, the self with the soul as death. And it is. It's a death of the ego. But this is the whole point. This is what we want to do. We want to resurrect in that way. But now we don't want to wait until we no longer have a human body. We want to do it now. And the more we practice it, the less terrifying it gets. It's sort of like the ego. Well, actually, I can't even say that that's really true. I think healing happens in spirals. It's not linear. So, you would think that all of this inner work I had done would prepare me for what I would meet with when I was really, going ardently into my heart around the time of starting this book and starting the efforts of the pilgrimage, for this book. But nothing really prepared me for, it was almost like the ego's, last hurrah, or not last hurrah, because it's a perpetual thing. Exactly. But what I'm saying is I wouldn't want to mislead a listener that, the more you do it, the easier it gets. It never ends. Like it just never ends. It never ends. But we do become more adept. We become more. We do become more aware of the mask and the guises that the ego wears. And we become less convinced by it. So I will say, I wasn't stuck in my anxiety disorder for as long as I was years and years ago when I first encountered it. So it's not that it gets less intense. It just gets less convincing. We get more, we are able to see better and clearer. The more we practice this self-emptying love, the more we practice going inward into the heart. But I would say that it's been very important to me to have other like spiritual Christians or mystic Christians or Christians who understand Mary in the way that I do. It's been very important to me to have a community as I practice, because it is like going into battle. It's just inner, it's an inner battle.
Yeah, I would agree. Have a community, have support. Don't go at it alone. Certainly not the Jesus prayer alone. From experience, it's an ass kicking. But and on the other side of the coin, Meggan, when I first started reading the Gnostic texts, like the Gospel of Mary, I was like angry at Peter and Andrews, like those two jerks. But these days I actually have a lot of compassion because I realize I see myself. They are the scared Christian. I mean, there's that line that makes me feel sorry for Peter when he goes, if they kill the Savior, what will they do to us? And I'm like, Peter, you don't have to be afraid and project on Mary. You don't.
Right. Exactly. And if we look at things metaphorically, and we read her gospel as though she is the voice of Sophia, as if she is the voice of the soul. If we really read that, read her gospel in that way, Peter is the voice of our ego that doesn't want change. He doesn't want things to change. Like he would have to give up his power, the power that he's used to having by being an educated male within the Roman hierarchy. He'd have to give up that known power in order to allow Mary to be the person who she is saying Christ allowed her to become. And that was terrifying to him, right? Because he didn't want to give up that egoic aspect of himself. So he's really, in a sense, an aspect, a voice of all of our ego. We don't want to die to the self that we've known. It's terrifying, even though we also might be miserable, And it's just the paradox. It's like we're miserable and we want change, but we're also terrified of it. So it's like Peter was so attracted to Christ because he had freed himself, and yet he was terrified of actually practicing the freedoms that Christ showed him.
Or he was expecting a material revolution. He thought salvation might be, this new world would be this
external.
Right, not the internal.
Yes.
Which is what Mary is. She's the internal voyage. So yeah, I do have, again, it's interesting how these characters, and just moving away from the Gospel of Mary, I love your section, how you give an interpretation of the resurrection scene in the Gospel of John. And it's very subtle. It's a translation thing, but it completely changes the scene. Could you tell the audience briefly about this?
Well, it was important for me to be able to practice an exegesis that hasn't really been possible. We are for so long we have heard sermons and we've heard exegetical interpretations of the resurrection, but it's coming from a place of seeing her as simply the penitent prostitute, or of simply kind of overlooking the fact that she happened to be the one who was there to meet him, because for me, she was the one who could perceive him. It's not an accident. She didn't just happen to be at the right place at the right time. She was there for a reason. It was her. It was her because it was meant to be her always. It was intended to be her. She was the one who could perceive him. She was the one who could witness him, that's why she was there. It was not an accident. It was not, and it's been overlooked. It's been, again, you mentioned at the beginning, she's been hidden in plain daylight as the most crucial figure in the Christian story. That, to me, has always been downplayed and interpreted in a way that is failing to see her significance.
But also, it's what he says that really makes a difference, because as you write, when she reaches for him, most Bible translations say, "Do not touch me." But when you translate it to "do not cling to me," it's a completely different context, isn't it?
Right.
It's kenosis.
Exactly. Self-emptying. Do not reach for me with your ego, which is longing right now, her humanity, of course, because she loved him fully. She's fully human and fully divine. So of course she wants to reach for him. But he's saying, do not cling to me. Do not cling to me, because the truth of who I am and where I am and will always be is within you. I am within you. So there is no reason, beloved, to reach for me, because I am and will always be within you, within your own heart. I'm there. And so, that the paintings, the interpretations, again, the exegesis of that moment has always been to emphasize her uncleanliness, or her unworthiness. And she's always depicted as being below Christ, and Christ is kind of giving her the hand, which is, first of all, no one was there to witness the witness. We have no account.
No social media accounts to put it on.
No. That we have no, they could have been standing eye to eye, and he could have, the gesture could have been that he put his hand on his own heart. We have no idea, but what that did was reinforce the fiction that she was a prostitute, and that somehow, her humanness or her sexuality could mess with his ascension, which is absurd, and which furthers that idea of the misogyny that allowed for women to be silenced within the church.
Yes, but silent no more, as Tori Amos sang, and that's why it's great that you're putting out these work, that scholars are doing what they're doing, so we keep banging the drum, and as you say, show the world that Christianity that is there for us, that was available for everybody 2,000 years ago. And as we get to the end, Meggan, what are you working on next, and where can the audience find out more about you?
Well, first I want to say thank you. Thank you for being an example of Levi, who comes to Mary's defense. Thank you for being a
the
man
middle of the road,
who's acknowledging and uplifting these stories and the voice of Mary Magdalene. So thank you. I'm sincerely and deeply grateful.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. I'm a Sophia fanboy. I can't help it.
I am working on workshops and speeches and events to continue to talk about Mary Magdalene's gospel and her role within the earliest form of the Christ movement. And my website is simply my full name. My first name has an egg in it, so it's Meggan, and my last name's Watterson, Watterson.
Wonderful. Well, you heard it here, and we will have this on the show notes, and highly recommend you get Mary Magdalene Revealed. As many listeners always tell me, these ancient texts don't have rituals or insights, and I'm like, they're there. We just got to look for them. I mean, they were written so people could experience them, and they have hidden
themselves.
Yes, and they have hidden rituals, and other scholars and researchers are finding this. So this is great to hear, but we are at the end. Well, thank you very much, Meggan, for coming on Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio and sharing about your wonderful book, Mary Magdalene Revealed.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And there you have it, our interview with Meggan Watterson on her electric new book, Mary Magdalene Revealed. There's just something about Mary, and I'm always delighted to pimp her. Not in the literal sense, 'cause we've had enough of that in history, written by the victors, and those holy texts written by the vicars. As mentioned in my previous drivel, we could only do an hour, largely because of personal issues caused by the monkey shines of archons. But for Prime members and patrons at Patreon, I will provide a package of Mary Magdalene insights. I'll present a section where Karen King summarizes the Gospel of Mary, then one with Jane Schauberg on Mary Magdalene's total role in Gnostic and Orthodox history, including what makes her singular and remarkable. We'll move to Michael Hearns, who will explain that Mary Magdalene is the first pope and the true high priestess of the ancient mysteries. We'll end with Dr. James Gardner on Mary's role in the Gospels, including a surprisingly good argument that Mary and Jesus were indeed married. More than 2 hours of bonus. By the end, you'll be an expert on Mary Magdalene and the gnosis she provides for your transformation. So please become a Prime member or patron at Patreon. There are so many rewards and avenues as we continue to grow a Gnostic community. Simply message me or go to thegodabovegod.com to find the means for so much gnosis and to keep growing this red pill cafeteria. Let's make sure Sophia's mission is a success in the gathering of her light sparks. Let's stop all this suffering and wars and just reverse a universe without laughter. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being yourself, your true self. Hello and goodbye as always.